Okay, so my name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founding director of the Manta Trust, which is a UK registered charity established to conserve manta rays and their habitat through conservation, raising awareness and education. And I've been working in the Maldives for 9 years, and I've been researching manta rays here for the last 7 years. And so most of my efforts have originated in the Maldives, and now we have projects in 12 different countries all around the world, all underneath the umbrella of the Manta Trust. So the Manta Trust, it's a UK charity, and it's been registered since the beginning of 2011. And it's really become, it's born out of a collaboration of different projects around the world. So I started researching manta rays in the Maldives almost 7-8 years ago, and I had the Maldivian Manta Ray project, and this was a conservation and research-based organisation. And as I started to meet other people doing manta research elsewhere around the world, we started to collaborate together, and we realized that it would be really beneficial if we could have an umbrella organization under which we could all work towards the same mission, the same aims. We're really lucky for scientists studying manta rays. Every single individual is born with a unique pattern of spots on their belly. So they have these white bellies which have covered in these black spots, and they're sort of smudges and spots and different patterns. They don't change from when they're born until when they die, so they're unique. They can be used to identify every individual in the database. So we take pictures of the underside of the manta rays on the bellies, and we're using these to then compare in a master database against all the other individuals, and we're using more and more computer-aided technology to do that, to speed up the process, and so it's a really really useful way to collect data on these animals. So far in the Maldives, we have a database of individuals that have been identified of about 2,700. So that's a lot, and actually from those, there's about 20,000 sightings. For mantas, the more we're studying them, the more we realize that they're very, very sort of sophisticated forms of feeding behavior to maximize the amount of planktonic food that they can consume as quickly as possible, because they're feeding against the tides and the currents, and they're very ephemeral, so they're very quickly changing. So the manta rays have to basically feed and sort of maximize very quickly what they can intake before the current sweeps away the food again. So to do this, they've evolved strategies to feed at the surface when the plankton is concentrated right at the surface of the water, and they will actually tilt their heads up towards the sun, and the top of their mouth actually comes out of the water. Sometimes the food is actually clustered on the seabed, so they will feed at the bottom. They would hold their cephalic fins out away from their mouth and actually position them almost a bit like a bulldozer, sort of shoveling up the food in front of them. The more common behavior that we see is the barrel rolling. This is when almost like a dog chasing its tail, the manta ray loops backwards like this. They flip in very tight circles. This is when they have a dense patch of plankton. So what they're doing is they're trying to turn around in that dense patch as quickly as possible to get as much of it into their mouth as quickly as they can. We also see them chain feeding, so we have one lined up behind the other, head to tail, and this helps to actually funnel more plankton into their mouths, because the animal in front is actually creating sort of conditions which push the plankton towards the back of the following animal, and so this actually benefits the individual behind as well. And then when you have these really spectacular mass feeding events, you can have 100, 200 manta rays feeding together. They can actually form these big spirals we call a cyclone feeding event, and they're very rare. They only happen in a few locations, and they only happen, as I said, a few times a year. So pretty spectacular though to see this column of animals feeding around in a circle. The second place we tend to see mantas is when they go to cleaning stations. So these are prominent outcrops on a reef, maybe a coral bommy over some sand, and the manta rays have learnt that if they visit these specific locations, small little fish called cleaner wrasse, they can remove parasites, dead skin, and they can also clean wounds on the surface of the animal itself. So the manta rays spend a lot of time cruising around very slowly over the top of these cleaning stations, and the little fish go inside the mouth, they go in around the eyes, inside the gills, and they're looking to remove all of these irritating parasites. So it's a very beneficial relationship for the mantas. So naturally, threats for manta rays are really only the largest of the predators. So big sharks, things like tiger sharks, hammerhead sharks. And also people tend not to think about cetaceans so much as predating on fishes like mantas or sharks, but large orcas, so killer whales, and indeed false killer whales are some of the main predators on these animals too. And in the Maldives we have actually both false killer whales and killer whales, orcas, and they do certainly have a dent in the population by killing them. In terms of conservation, we know very little about these animals, especially the Manta Rays, and so one of the most important things is to try and gather more science to understand the life history strategies of these animals, how many there are, where they're moving, what's their reproductive strategies, and then we can start to look at the impacts of the threats. We know that there's really increasing threats to these animals, massive increase in fisheries in the last 10-15 years, directly targeting these species, the mantas and the Manta Rays, for their gills, to supply a Chinese medicine, and this is causing massive declines in the populations of these species all around the world where these fisheries are taking place. And so we really desperately need to understand more about them, to put in place conservation measures, and one of the most important things that we can do is to use international governing bodies and conservation organizations like the UN, like CITES, to try and regulate trade in these species, and that's what we're hoping to do for manta rays.